Live everywhere on netrootsradio.com. David Waldman, Kagro, in the morning. Now, here's David Waldman.
Hey, good morning, everybody. How you doing? It is Monday, October 11th, 2021. Time for another show. Time for some vacation for many of you. Many of you may have the day off, and it may be a new reason, or at least a new name for the reason for you to have a day off, if you were lucky enough ever to have a day off on this particular date. I don't remember how they determine it, but anyway, it's the bank holiday and whatever else holiday formerly known as Day. You know, I guess we're bleeping it now. Why don't we do that? We can do that. I think I have a sound effect somewhere for that. But anyway, the more important thing than what it used to be called is what it's called now. I guess this is the first time that today has been marked as Indigenous Peoples Day by a proclamation from the White House, which seems sort of official. And I mean, I don't know. It's hard for me to say that it's the first official or the first Indigenous Peoples Day, because I imagine, hey, you could declare it whenever you want, and then it would be Indigenous. If it can be World Oat Checks Day or whatever the hell else they come up with, then it can be Indigenous Peoples Day whenever you want. But this is the first time that there's been a White House proclamation, which strikes me as, you know, odd. Just in terms of, did the Obama White House never get around to that? Was it not a thing yet? Maybe that was still emerging at the time, or he was just looking for ways to be less controversial somehow, so that he could pass a giant healthcare program. I don't remember exactly what the situation was. Seems to me like something they might have been able to accomplish, but maybe that's not where their eyes were at the time. Anyway, we have it now. It wasn't going to happen during the last 4 years, that's for sure. And as a matter of fact, I have seen Charles Pierce, I think, picked up on the fact that Marjorie Taylor Greene, of course, would take the opportunity to make sure to use the old name for the holiday and wish everybody a happy one of those days. And then she misspelled it, so that was a special Marjorie Taylor Greene touch on that one. But yes, Indigenous Peoples Day and for our Canadian friends, Thanksgiving, which is a little weird because I know around here, when we have our American Thanksgiving, that's a bit controversial too, especially in the absence of an Indigenous Peoples Day. And a reminder that, well, it's Thanksgiving for, you know, as legend has it, the Pilgrims having their first Thanksgiving. And they had that, I guess, basically as a result of Indigenous help, which maybe, I'm sure in hindsight, they thought about as a possible mistake. But nice thing to do at the time. I don't know that Canadian Thanksgiving has the same connotation, and Canadians have done a slightly better job in acknowledging the role of Indigenous folks in their in their founding and and continuing in the modern society. So, well, okay, there's that. So I don't know. I'll let the Canadians sort out their own problems. They've been pretty good at it so far. Although we do keep infecting them with our problems, and I apologize for that. Sorry. Imagine me apologizing to Canadians. That's pretty amazing, because usually they're the ones apologizing first, just out of habit. Anyway, good morning. Things to catch up on today. Kagro in the Morning radio show is live now. Bill knows already. He's closer to Canada than I am. He asks, was the weekend really as quiet and drama-free as it seemed? It did seem nice and quiet, didn't it? Kagro X and Greg Dworkin, Dem from Connecticut, reveal the quiet and drama-free answer. So, blah! There, I add a little drama to it. I don't know if we have, you know what, we can just say, that's automatic drama right there. Well, unless, of course, one of them decides to go ballistic doing it, and so I've just done that. So that saves Greg from the trouble of doing it. I don't even know how he would do it. I've never heard him. I don't think. Go ballistic. Try. See if we can come up with a reason for him to do that. But, yeah, plenty to round up today. Let's see. Many directions that we may go. Suggestions already coming in. It was a quiet and relatively drama-free weekend, I think. We had college son home, still here, And returning tomorrow, they took Monday and Tuesday off for a short fall break. Last year they had to skip it because COVID. And in fact, last year's first semester, they gave up all their breaks and all their days off and raced towards finishing the semester by Thanksgiving in order to, of course, deal with the then raging COVID pandemic. Of course, we're still raging in the COVID pandemic. Oh, one of the things I found out over the drama-free weekend is we've reached this weird, I don't know, I guess you could say inflection point, but this weird balance point. In case you were wondering, how's the pandemic going overall in terms of the numbers? Yes, it appears to be the case, according to the charts, that things are, as Greg mentioned, peaking and having peaked, and in fact on the downslope in many places. I suppose there are some hot spots still might be rising, but even I think in the hot spots, that is to say, where the numbers are highest per capita or whatever, it's still lower than it may have been earlier. So I think we are on the downslope here. The virus has just consumed all the low-hanging fruit here. Still plenty of unvaccinated idiots out there still willing to pick it up. As a matter of fact, Alan West over the weekend, just heading into the weekend, I think announced that he had contracted the virus. His wife as well, she was vaccinated. He took this as a sign that the vaccine was ineffective and stupid. But I believe she's home and he's in the hospital. So there's your answer on that one. Turns out he's been claiming since the beginning, or having his people claim on his behalf anyway, that he was taking all the controversial treatments, including the ones that actually work, the monoclonal therapies, which do work, but of course you have to get the virus first, and that's not a good plan. But he had also said that he had been taking hydroxychloroquine and ivermectin, I think as preventatives. So that also, you should also take, if you're going to take away from this that the vaccine doesn't work because my wife got it and then she also got the virus, then I think you have to draw the same conclusion about the efficacy of hydroxychloroquine and ivermectin. But those are some very big words. It's still early in the morning, and a doctor is coming later on, and he can tell us whether any of that is really true. But yes, in terms of the numbers and the inflection point, I believe, according to the Worldometer's numbers, somewhere on Saturday morning, we reached the point where more people had died in the United States, more Americans or more residents of the United States, however they may have arrived here, have died from COVID-19 in calendar year 2021 than had died previously in all of 2019 and 2020. Of course, just the tail end of 2019, there even was a novel coronavirus to talk about. Still a little unsure about whether it had really arrived on our shores until early 2020, but researchers still working on that and trying to decide on, I guess it's still the official date that they're going with officially, but we have learned that things move at a glacial pace and sometimes change later on. I think they're still pinning it in February, possibly late January, but there's still a lot of people who suspect that some strain of this virus had made it to American shores, perhaps as early as December. How? I don't know. These things are a mystery. Whether they'll settle it, whether it makes any difference, I don't know. But for those of you who thought of 2020 as the year that the pandemic ran wild and did the most damage because it had us locking down and had the schools closed, there was certainly the most disruption. In 2021, we've decided to get along with the virus and, I guess, in some cases, die along with it. And, unfortunately, we've reached that point. 2021, deadlier year from coronavirus, and we still have some time left. So if you haven't, then I guess it's time to play the little recording to remind you.
Get the vaccine already, you
and then talk to the doctor who read us that line so famously. Good morning, Greg. How are you?
Good morning. Remember, not my line. That's from
right.
A Canadian satire publication, but that's okay.
Thanks, Canada.
Here's some stuff about the coronavirus, which I think is important in the sense that coronavirus is driving optimism, pessimism, malaise, whatever you want to call it,
okay,
for Biden and the Biden administration overall.
Yes.
along with no movement on voting rights and no movement on the infrastructure proposal, along with the environmentally focused and people-focused reconciliation. So it's too early to tell, because when you're in the middle of not moving, you can't see whether or not you actually have moved at the end. But it's important to get this stuff underway. Let's talk about the pandemic, because I think that that's really the focus.
All right.
This New Yorker article, quite interesting. Another winner of COVID by Dhruv Kular. Nationwide, the Delta wave is waning, but what do the coming months hold? So, reasons for optimism. 78% of adults in the U.S. have now received at least one dose, and that's true despite the anti-vaxxers. Recent mandates are pushing the number higher. Millions of vulnerable Americans are getting boosters. By Halloween, Pfizer-BioNTech's vaccine may be authorized for use among children aged 5 to 11. This week is the booster for Moderna and J&J discussion at FDA. Earlier this month, Merck announced its antiviral drug, Molnupiravir, roughly halves the likelihood that people with mild or moderate COVID will be hospitalized or die. That's an oral drug, and that's good.
Yep.
It could dramatically change how COVID's treated outside of hospitals. Rapid antigen tests are ramping up because they're going to spend $1 billion to try to do that, and that's all good. Plus, the epidemiological backdrop that nobody discusses is a third of Americans have been infected already, and they carry some degree of natural immunity, even though Tom Frieden, the ex-CDC head, ex-New York City Department of Public Health head, says that it's not quite as good as vaccine immunity, and it's also very variable. Some people get a lot of immunity from being infected, and some people not so much. Some people it lasts, some people it fades. So it's a little touch and go there, and so vaccines are better in that sense, a little bit more consistent. But those are the optimism things. The pessimism is also real. The United States has the lowest vaccination rate among wealthy democracies. It's fallen behind Uruguay, Cambodia, Mongolia.
The wealthiest, yes.
The anti-vaccine movement remains a potent force. Last Monday, protesters tore down a COVID testing site in New York City. According to Kaiser Family Foundation, 1 in 6 adults remains adamantly opposed. In the UK, 97% of people over 65 are fully vaccinated. During the Delta wave, their daily cases reached 80% of record levels, but daily deaths only 11%. So once you're vaccinated, the disconnect between you get it but you don't die is pretty stark. And that's why public health people focus on so you don't die. The Americans are focused on let's not get sick in the first place, and so they're into boosters a lot more than the public health people are. 84% of older adults are fully vaccinated. Cases and deaths are more tightly coupled. Both recently reached around 2/3 of last winter's level. Are we going to have as bad a surge this winter as last winter? Ashish Jha, Dean of Brown University School of Public Health, very prominent public health voice. I think we can say no. But what people don't appreciate is that if it finds pockets of unvaccinated people and just rips through them, then if you're an older person living in that kind of community and you're not vaccinated, it's going to be a very bad winter.
Or short.
Right?
Ending.
So one of the more interesting aspects of this that we discussed off and on, very nice article here, kind of summarizing it by Maura Jutkas in the Washington Post. What do all these stories of vaccine denial deaths do to our sense of empathy?
Damaging it.
And tells the story of an Alabama fella, 51-year-old father, intubated and died alone. And his daughter just started seeing all these comments, anti-vax, stupid hill to die on, he died for nothing, they get what they deserve, and those are the milder ones.
Yeah.
In fact, there's a website called Sorry Anti-Vaxxer, which catalogs the COVID-19 deaths of people who had publicly posted their rejection of the vaccine.
Yes.
And they found out about this guy, posted his photo, and lots and lots of comments.
Yeah, I'd imagine so.
Right? So why is there such a dearth of empathy for people like that? Well, a couple of things. One, a reason.
There are many.
Yeah. Besides the Schadenfreude. It's associated with an in-group, out-group psychology. When it comes to vaccination, that's a political identity, so this issue has been associated with this already vitriolic and hostile intergroup conflict.
Certainly part of it, yes.
Right? And that's why people, for
right,
example, if you die, you get awarded the Herman Cain Award.
Yeah, particularly if you've been flagrant about insisting that wouldn't happen to you.
Right? Pier Carlo Valdesolo, visiting associate professor at Macalester College in St. Paul, Minnesota, who studies moral judgment, recalls the adage, one death is a tragedy, a million are a statistic.
True.
That was who, Stalin?
That's, I don't know, but yeah, certainly an interesting comment on empathy, and doesn't necessarily describe people who lack empathy either. It's just...
Well, the feelings are predictable and inevitable, he says.
Yeah,
our political and epidemiological circumstances have created the perfect cocktail for Schadenfreude. So we have the in-group, out-group thing. Second, he says, it needs to feel like the sufferer has done something harmful and that they deserve it. People who are vaccinated interpret the vaccine as something you do not just for yourself, but to protect others.
Right.
And not taking it actively harms other people. So if you have an out-group member who's harming other people, people in your own group, maybe, then you're prone to think, okay, this guy deserves it.
Yeah.
So you do sorry anti-vaxxer and you put together a website. And then finally, the third thing is the ability to have behaved otherwise or perceived agency here. That is, you had a choice.
Right. It's
not like, I got the flu. There's nothing I could do about it. Yeah, I got a vaccine, but we all know it's not quite that effective. So it seems like the person, I hurt myself skydiving.
Yes.
Well, okay,
right.
But you chose to skydive. That's not the same thing as I hurt myself because somebody hit me with a car and they were drunk.
Right.
I mean, totally different circumstances here.
True.
Right. I was rock climbing in the rain and I got hurt.
Yeah.
Well, yeah.
Don't do that. Right.
Right. So it seems like the person who hasn't taken the vaccine could have done so, maybe easily, and they had the ability to choose otherwise. And anytime we think somebody's got that, then we feel like they're more responsible for this bad choice.
Yeah.
Okay. And now the founder and the two moderators of the Herman Cain Award spoke to the Post on the condition only their first names be used because Reddit users threatened them. When he first discovered the subreddit, moderator John felt bad that I didn't feel bad. It's like, wow, you're suffering the consequences of your actions. But as he spent more time on the site scrolling through death after death, he's come to view more of the awardees as victims of misinformation.
Aha. Okay. Interesting.
I'm more compassionate because, they basically got conned.
Yeah, many of them.
And we talked about the psychology of being conned. If you're conned, the last thing in the world you want to do is admit that that's the case. You then to double and triple down on, here are the reasons why ivermectin must work because you can't suggest I was conned by this. The fact that there's literally fake research that has to be recalled and that people are making money off of selling it to me. I can't admit that that's the case. So I'm just going to take like 3 times the dose because why not?
Yeah. And then it is the last thing in the world that you do.
Right. So it's sort of a bad thing. So two seemingly contradictory things can be true at the same time. The sites can be ghastly places for trolls to act their cruelest, and they can also do a little bit of good by motivating a subset of their audience to get their jab. So, there you have it. I'm not commenting on people who do that. It's a free country. You can say what you want. Not for me. I'm more in the compassionate. I think these people were I blame Fox News and OAN a lot more than I blame themselves for not getting the vaccine. They think they're right. They literally think they're right. They don't have information any other way. We'll get to that in another context with politicians, but that happens.
It does. We've seen it.
So there you go. Despite her father's death, that Alabama fella, the daughter says she's still undecided about getting vaccinated. For now, I just want to grieve. She wants to remember her dad is the handsome dad who coached her childhood basketball team, and she doesn't want to feel the way the website has made her feel.
Okay.
Well, get the vaccine then.
Yeah, that will probably help you feel better.
But again, just like looking at public health, not public health, but health workers who may not be licensed professionals, but simply work in hospitals in their neighborhoods, in their communities.
Right.
They're going to be products of their neighborhoods and communities. So if they have vaccine hesitation because their entire community does, the hospital is located in Alabama, the nursing home is located in Mississippi, so on and so forth, or South Dakota for that matter, or Texas, you're a product of your community. And it is a shame and it is a tragedy, and you have to work hard to try to change that. But it's sort of understandable, which isn't the same thing as, so I empathize with them.
Yeah. I mean, it's explainable, if not understandable necessarily, if you can't get to there because you don't have enough.
Right, but it's still an ongoing pandemic, even though the numbers are dropping, which is good. We don't know what's going to come next. And so it's important to get the jabs and your boosters if you're eligible and if it's appropriate for you to do so. And more people will be vaccinated, including 5 to 11s. That'll come next week.
5 to 11s?
And not by Halloween, but certainly by Thanksgiving.
Age group, right. Yeah, I hope so. That'd be nice. It would be great to have had it before.
But we'll see. Pediatricians took an internal survey. I saw this in one of the trade mags. And trade pubs, whatever you want to call it, trade publications. Yeah, okay. And the pediatricians in the primary care offices talking to parents figure about 50% of the kids will get vaccinated at first, not too much higher than that, because there's still a lot of hesitancy. And the assumption is if the parents aren't vaccinated, then they won't vaccinate their kids.
Oh, yeah, right. Well, probably not, I would think, but only 50%, huh?
We'll see. That's at first. Then it'll rise slowly. So, don't expect everybody to rush out and get vaccinated is the point. Well, that's what the people on the front lines are saying.
Okay.
So all of that, is important. I said there was a sort of a correlate with misinformation from politicians.
Yes, right.
And this has to do with a book that Adam Schiff wrote.
Book that Adam Schiff wrote. Oh.
Yeah, about the impeachment. Representative Schiff reveals impeachment regrets tensions on Capitol Hill after the insurrection.
Yeah.
9 months after the insurrection in the U.S. Capitol on January 6th, Representative Adam Schiff says the Capitol's a different place. His new book, Midnight in Washington, How We Almost Lost Our Democracy and Still Could, gives background of what the lawmakers might have done differently and what he might have done differently. He said he got, pilloried for making a sarcastic version of the Ukraine call. And he said, that was too bad. But the fact is it wouldn't really have mattered, like with most things that Republicans glom onto. As to, you did that, so that changes everything.
Yeah, right.
Chuck Schumer said something nasty to us, therefore we won't cooperate, as if he were cooperating since Mitch McConnell decided not to approve Merrick Garland.
It was so great up until that point.
Right. Yes, I heard it. Sure, it was something they could glom onto. Yes, we gave them an easy target. No, it's not really the cause of what's going on here. So the point that I referenced when I was talking about misinformation for anti-vaxxers is this part. Asked what shocked him during the impeachment trial. He said, what shocked me during the trial was the realization as I listened to some of these GOP senators that they understood the president was guilty. They recognized that he was guilty. They were surprised by the abundance of the evidence because they only knew what they knew from watching Fox. There's the tie-in. If you only watch Fox, you don't hear about the January 6th folks who are being prosecuted and what sort of stuff they did and how many guns they had and what the plot was and so on and so forth.
Right.
You just don't hear it because they don't cover it.
Right. They were patriots and maybe tourists.
Right. They cover Adam Schiff saying something nasty about Mitch McConnell. Right. They only knew what they knew from watching Fox. And even when confronted with this evidence, it wasn't enough to move them to give meaning to their oath because it might cost them their job or it might cost them a position in the cabinet. And there was nothing they treasured quite so much as those things. And while that may sound harsh, I don't know how often we have said on the show, whether it's Democrats or Republicans, their main job is getting reelected. And every time we treat it as if, well, their job is to pass legislation that helps the country. No, their main job is to get reelected. If you don't focus on that, then you're missing why they do what they do. Why does Sinema do what she does? It's awful, and it may cost Biden his presidency, and it may cost Democrats Congress if it goes in the worst possible way and nothing gets done, and Democrats look feckless, without feck, lacking feck, And why is she doing it? Because it helps her at home.
I guess
and until
so.
she thinks
Rather be
otherwise,
here as a
she's
minority
not going to
member.
act any differently. And following her into the bathroom isn't going to change that.
Well, I can't think of anything that would happen in the bathroom that would help. But
Well,
yeah.
they went into the bathroom, therefore they're doing everything. Well, that's not the issue. The issue is that Sinema's focused on what she thinks is best for her reelection back home, and Manchin is focused on what he thinks is best for his situation.
Yes, I mean they think
Right?
so.
That's just so that's what you got to work with. Now that doesn't mean that it's all doom and gloom, that nothing gets done. The fact that you really haven't heard a lot about these guys and it was a quiet weekend means they are working, they are negotiating.
Presumably.
But an interesting observation by Simon Rosenberg is that the more the media focuses on the difficulties Democrats are having in pulling together super complex legislation that's going to change the lives of everybody in the country, and therefore it's going slower than everybody wants, the more they focus on that, the more the press focuses on that, the more Democrats focus on that, the more they spend money on commercials talking about what they want to do in order to pressure Sinema and Manchin into doing what they want. The more all of that happens, the less the focus is on Biden taking steps to deal with the pandemic. And so you have the paradoxical situation of, in doing the hard work that's necessary to get the complex legislation passed, you lose the narrative of the simple part, which is Biden is laser focused on the pandemic. He isn't. He's also focused on this other thing. Well, he should be focused on this other thing. We all said he's got to get more involved. Well, now that he is, why isn't he focused on the pandemic? Well, hello. Welcome to the modern press. But that's also reality. Expecting them to be different is futile. And so you have to manage those expectations.
Well, yes. Broad spectrum laser, perhaps.
How do you do that? Well, every time you talk about the pandemic, you say, I'm laser focused on the pandemic, and let them tell you that you're not.
Yeah, I guess. So you're laser focused on telling me I'm not laser focused. What about that? That could possibly dissuade them from that. Well, that is interesting. The shift thing gives me an interesting thing to look at, too. I was surprised to hear him say that there were Republicans who knew he was guilty but were worried about getting a cabinet position. It's a little late to be getting a cabinet position from Trump, but it could still happen because he was still changing the cabinet even then, even in his second impeachment.
Hi, I'm Scott Anderson, the guy that writes the daily summary for this show, Kagro in the Morning. Thank you to everyone that supports this show. Many of you send donations through PayPal, Patreon, Square Cash, Radio Public, and so on. Some of you write your own essays and send them in, or read articles with your own commentary. We appreciate it. Now, some of you are listening to this and thinking, I'd like to help, but isn't there something I could do that wouldn't require money or effort? Why, yes, there is. You can just like us. On Daily Kos, they call it the recommend button. YouTube has a thumbs up. There are hearts and likes and love buttons. Tap our love button. Tap our love button every day. Share our shows and summaries on Facebook and Twitter, YouTube and iTunes, Stitcher and Amazon. Most of these places allow you to write a review, so a sentence or two would be great. Recommend us to social media, or tell your friends to listen to the show. You aren't just helping us, you're helping them find their new favorite thing to listen to. You could change the world. So thank you in advance from me and everybody else in the world.
Welcome back now to the Kagro in the Morning Show here on Netroots Radio. Jump straight back in. Greg Dworkin still here with us. Things still terrible.
I was struck by this Patrick Chovanec quote. Patrick Chovanec is a conservative who tends to write about economics and with a special interest in China and trade. And he wrote, the main goal of every Republican politician these days seems to be to prove themselves the true heir of Slytherin.
That does seem to be the case.
And it really does seem to be the case.
Grassley spent the weekend doing that. There was a Trump rally in Iowa, I guess, and he came and licked all the whatever off of the boots. Well, I'm not sure what you're supposed to be licking there, but it's not good. It's on a boot.
Right. So the other thing that's contributing to Biden enthusiasm malaise
rats. Where's my thing? Okay.
Is the economic issue, which has been covered both by the New York Times and the Washington Post, and so therefore it must be important because the papers of record or on record is covering this.
Right.
And that is the supply chain logjams.
Oh, yeah. Oh, we know
which
all about
appear
that.
to be a mess and not likely to get fixed over the next year.
Yeah. Hard to fix them in winter somehow, for some reason.
Well, there's a lot of different things going on, but one of the more interesting approaches is to look at what's happening at the choke points. This month, it says Washington Post, the median cost of shipping a standard rectangular metal container from China to the West Coast has hit a record $20,586, almost twice what it cost in July, which is twice what it cost in January. Freight handling equipment too often is not where it's needed, and when it is, there aren't enough truckers or warehouse workers to operate it. And supply headaches that were viewed as temporary when the coronavirus pandemic began now are expected to last through 2022.
It's a long way.
Part of the problem is that you get so much money for shipping stuff from China because that's what people want, whether it's parts or materials to make stuff here or whether it's stuff made there.
Chinese food from Grubhub.
That it's actually cheaper to send the empty containers back to China to get more than it is to direct those same empty containers to the middle of the country so that farmers can ship their stuff.
Yes.
So you get this weird economic incentive to create more problems for getting things to where they need to be because there isn't enough to go around. And, again, part of the problem is the ports themselves, many of them, while incredibly busy, aren't coordinated. They don't coordinate between the different shippers there, the truckers, the railroads, the mechanisms by which you unload and get things out. And whereas European and other countries have, a single app or website where everybody can understand where everybody's stuff is. So that you could, for example, have trucks where the cargo is coming and know that there's, going to be a need in 3 days and so on and so forth. And look ahead as to what the plan is so that you can pre-position material you need. In the U.S., the differing companies won't share that information because they feel it's proprietary. And so it's like the old medical system. Everybody has a medical record, but none of the hospitals talk to each other because they're all different records. So they all use these tracking programs, but they won't share them, and they won't go on the same platform because they feel that loses a competitive edge somehow. And in the meantime, there's no coordination, and therefore it's very inefficient, and all their stuff gets stuck, and they lose money.
That's competitive.
I mean, the railroads, for example, could, because what happens is they come by boat, and then they get unloaded to trucks, and the trucks bring them to trains, and then the trains bring them everywhere else, and there's a pile up everywhere. And the railroad companies feel it's economically inefficient to build a spur directly to the port because, that's only temporary. And how are we going to make money in the long run?
But does it have to be? And I
But
sort
it
of
doesn't
thought
have
that
to be.
was
That
the
might
case,
be the way of doing
actually.
things. Exactly. So, everybody has their own fiefdom, and there's no coordination for how you untangle this Gordian knot.
Yeah,
is the point.
I kind of thought that there were railheads at the end of the port, and that was the whole idea. I don't know. Maybe in the Schoolhouse Rock cartoon version of intermodal transportation.
Right, you need that. For goods to
Intermodal
move
surface
seamlessly from
transportation.
overseas factories to American addresses, the ocean-going vessels, shipping containers, cargo terminals, truckers, chassis providers, railroads all must work together like runners in a relay race, says the Washington Post. If equipment gets stuck at any point, delays ripple across the entire chain, but the U.S. is decades behind foreign ports in getting carriers, terminals, and shippers to provide each other access to commercial data for planning purposes, says Gene Soroka, executive director of the Port of Los Angeles, which is an enormous port. Long Beach, Los Angeles. Concerns over data privacy, business secrets, and security have resulted in a fragmented approach. Individual ports operate as separate fiefdoms rather than part of a national system.
Yes.
And talks about how in Rotterdam, the Dutch city, everybody works together using a common data sharing platform called Port Exchange. That's an exchange.
Yeah.
Right? But the U.S. doesn't do that. I think New Orleans is the only port that does it that way.
Really? Well,
L.A. is starting to.
It sounds like a good idea, and somebody could make some money doing that. I thought we were coordinating all that stuff. That's where I learned
and apparently we're not. So that's part of the problem.
I guess that's it. That's where I
The
learned
New
my
York Times
terminology.
version It has come to this in the great supply chain disruption. They're running out of places to put things as one of the largest ports in the U.S. We're talking about Savannah, Georgia.
Wow.
As major ports contend with a staggering pileup of cargo, which once seemed like a temporary phenomenon, traffic jam that would eventually dissipate, is increasingly viewed as a new reality that could require a substantial refashioning of the world's shipping infrastructure. You know, part of the reason is people are getting used to ordering everything on Amazon, so they expect it to be delivered.
Yes. I saw some infrastructure problems with Amazon on Friday night driving back from the college. An Amazon Prime truck that had driven off of 95 and into the woods.
And because of that, Long Beach can't unroll.
Yeah. I mean, there was 20 miles of backup. I can tell you that. That was somebody else's infrastructure problem, too. And all the rest of the Amazon Prime trucks were stuck in it, too. I guess we could add that. But so was everything else. Yeah, choke points. They're everywhere. Wow. Okay, so Savannah, too. Is that the picture?
Right.
Yeah, they're all stacked
Yeah,
up.
to relieve the congestion in Savannah, Mr. Lynch is overseeing a $600 million expansion, swapping out one berth for a bigger one for larger container ships, extending the storage yard across another 80 acres, adding room for 6,000 more containers, enlarging the rail yard to 18 tracks from 5. But even as Mr. Lynch sees development as imperative, he knows the expanded facilities alone won't solve the problem. If there's no space out here looking at the stacks of containers, it doesn't matter if I have 50 berths.
I guess.
Right? Many of the containers are piled 5 high, making it harder for cranes to sort through the towers to lift the needed boxes when the trucks arrive.
Oh, like if your container is the 5th or
Yeah.
the 4th one down even? Yeah.
Right.
Well,
Right? So many businesses now assume that the pandemic has fundamentally altered commercial life in permanent ways. Those who might never have shopped for groceries or clothing online, especially older people, have gotten a taste of the convenience. And on top of those changes in behavior, the supply chain disruption has imposed new frictions. So, and as you look at that, the fact that they're discussing this means they understand there's a problem, they're looking for solutions, but those solutions are going to take a while, and that's why it's going to be a year-long thing. So you can add pandemic uncertainties to that. You could add supply chain uncertainties. So, again, you tend to blame the people in charge. Democrats are in charge, and even though there's no fix for either one of these things, that it's a quick one, those are the headwinds.
yeah. Well, we're all getting the news finally, and supply chain is a terminology now that's in common use. People are beginning to grasp this stuff.
Right, and there was a whole different, longer discussion, which I'm not going to do right now, about David Shore reliving the 2008, 2012, and 2016 and 2020 elections, looking at what Democrats do right, not do right. Ezra Klein interviewed him for the New York Times, and there's a lot of doom and gloom about, basically saying if you don't have a third-way Bill Clinton approach to the fact that a lot of Americans, just view immigration discussions, no matter what you say about it, as bad.
Yeah.
And you lose votes, and you're going to lose white working class votes unless you do something. And that do something hanging out there is, so does that mean you tolerate racism in order to win elections, which only turns off your own base? Setting that aside, the issues that focus around that Shore and Klein at least are getting at is there's some definite problems, issues, concerns about reaching the electorate that affect how people look at you as a party. You have to, as a party, get stuff done, which is why the Cinema Mansion stuff is so damaging. And that because they're real in terms of how you approach folks, they are who they are. You can't make them different by willing it. And add the pandemic, which is a real thing, and add the supply chain issues we were just talking about, which are real things. The point here is that everybody who complains that the Democrats don't message properly,
yes, that's everybody.
That's not the point.
Oh. Well,
you deal with these issues.
Point,
it's not a question of messaging, and you can't message your way out of these issues.
That's true.
So, that's not the focus. If all you're focusing on is messaging, you're not dealing with trying to get at what these problems are and trying to deal with them. That's what you need to do.
Well, Madison Cawthorn.
And I say that as somebody who tends to be somewhat critical of how the U.S. Public Health Service messages the pandemic.
Yes, but only
But going back to that quote about get your frickin' vaccine.
Oh, yes. You want me to play it? I can.
Messaging isn't the fricking issue.
That's true.
Getting your fricking vaccine is the fricking issue.
That's the idea. I mean, you can't just message around nothing. There has to be something there for people to do.
Right. So if you're not dealing with that, then you're wasting your time talking about messaging.
Okay. I can buy that. Is that what this whole thing was about? I don't know. The few things I've managed to avoid figuring out there, sometimes things are trending on Twitter.
Well, the issue is that, look, there's a lot of white working class folks that are tending toward the Republican Party. And they're located in places where, as you know, the Electoral College makes it so that it favors Republicans. And so Republicans tend to have an advantage in the Senate that you can't wish away or message away. And so what do you do about that? And that's really the debate. Do you pander to them?
Punch them. I don't know.
Do you try to persuade them? It's not the same thing as pandering. But if you talk to them, then your base will accuse you of pandering. And then you get into sectional, fighting, which doesn't help anything. And that's, the heart of this discussion here. You're identifying the problem as ever since 9/11, white working class voters have tended toward the Republican Party. What do you suggest doing about it? Are you suggesting that you pander to the fact that a lot of them are racist? Like in Iowa? Like Steve King people?
Yeah, what about that? No, I wouldn't.
Well, then what do you suggest?
I don't know. Not that
Message better? That won't do it. That's my point. That's why I brought that up.
Okay. Yeah, well, I'm not certain it's any clearer, but I think I understand at least what they were talking about.
Right. So they're trying to sort through, and I think a good way, what is the problem here, and what are the real solutions for how we approach that? And they're touching on identifying the problem, and they haven't got to the solutions any more than the people trying to untangle the supply chain have, any more than people who are trying to untangle the pandemic have.
Yes.
These are really complicated issues without simple answers. And so they're going to take time. And, my point about messaging is that the time to discuss this as a complicated issue, it's going to take time, is at the very beginning. If you haven't done it then, you've lost your ability to do that. Then everything else is catch up.
All right. What can we do in terms? There's probably an app for it, like there is the ports in Europe. An app that will help us
So you should go to Europe and see what Rotterdam is doing, because they probably do it better. Look, Germany just had a really complicated election with no clear winner yet, because they're trying to figure stuff out Israeli style. And it's a pretty good example of how democracy is supposed to work. Yeah. Unlike our place, where everybody's trying to attack Democrats for winning the election and trying to figure out a way so that they could game it so that they could win it next time, which is why Adam Schiff was so depressed with his Republican colleagues.
Yeah, it is interesting.
Trump was cheating and he got caught cheating. We just have to cheat better.
I guess, is that the suggestion?
Well, yes. That's why they're trying to install their own people as Secretary of State in all the different states.
Okay, I thought you were talking about Adam Schiff saying, all right, well, let's cheat.
No, that's what the Republicans are saying. That's why he's so depressed about it. Instead of saying, gee, you guys were trying to actually overthrow the government and that's a bad thing, they're saying, we were?
What?
But it didn't work.
Okay.
And Schiff said, yes, and they respond by saying, so we just have to do it better next time.
Yeah. All right. Well, that I can understand, and just in terms of clearing up what's been talked about. I did see, I don't remember which ivory tower New York Times type person it was who was tweeting it over the end of the weekend. But yeah, that doesn't seem to have sunk in with everybody. Like I am seeing a lot of journalist types saying, well, for all the anger about it and all the accusations, the coup didn't work, which means the system is more resilient and transparent than you think. Except my recollection of the events of January in particular were that they were pointing at Republican officials, like Brad Raffensperger, standing in the way, or as they have it, standing up to Trump and refusing to go along. Although he was pretty clear and has been pretty clear since, saying, well, the reason I didn't do it is the thing that he wanted me to do was illegal. at the time. We are now legalizing what he asked me to do, and I would feel a lot more comfortable doing it next time now that the law is changing. And I think they're missing this. And this is problematic. I mean, Brad Raffensperger wanted to help, just felt like he couldn't because the law was standing in the way. Now that the law is changing, thanks to the Georgia legislature and other states changing the same thing, there are lots of they don't even have to swap out secretaries of state for loyalists necessarily every time. Now they have secretaries of state who said, had it been legal like this, then, yeah, I would have done it. Nothing would have been standing in my way. It wasn't Raffensperger's opposition to Trump. It was Raffensperger's interpretation of the law. Law changed? Great. I'll do it for you next time.
Right. So...
guys are missing this.
Here's a nice thread to go along with a lot of what we talk about, which is totally random, but I just happened to come across it, and I think it's pretty good. It's called A Tale of Three Studies, Selecting Data to Confirm What You Already Believe. A thread.
Okay. What is this thread?
I like threads like that. Threads like that are always good. So in April, scholars released a paper upon which liberal punditry pounced, evidence burnished with academic credentials confirming favorite theses among folks opining on campaigns despite not running them. Right? Democrats are in electoral peril talking about race.
Okay.
All right.
All right. I think I'm.
Democrats have started using racial justice framing to promote their progressive policies. This goes back to April. Like student debt relief is good because it will close the racial wealth gap. Is this language helpful for the cause? In a new working paper, we find no, it isn't. Then another scholar released results in July wherein race-forward messaging was more persuasive and mobilizing than colorblind alternatives. And then the third one was altered design with opposition rebuttals failed to replicate original results. Race-explicit and race-neutral messaging proved statistically indistinguishable in persuading voters to back progressive policies.
So literally three different results here. Okay.
All three studies by respected scholars uses randomized controlled trials, both similar sample size, but the first piece garnered extensive media coverage and the next two met with near silence. In speculative swing about Democratic strategy about 2022, a flurry of purportedly data-driven declarations on risk of alienating essential voters with cultural issues, but the three studies show humans of every pedigree adept at privileging evidence to support their existing beliefs. And many liberal commentators and Democratic operatives don't merely ignore or discount contrary evidence. They overestimate what the surveys they do choose to heed can reliably predict about what works in real-world campaigns. We see that all the time. Oh, you're running on that? Of course it's going to do well. Polling says people really like it.
Yes.
Like gun safety. So of course you're going to run on it because the polls say like most people approve of it, and then you run, you lose.
Yes, I mean.
Well, why?
Polls do
Well,
say that.
because either there were other issues or your opponent framed it better than you did.
Certainly possible.
Or even though people approve it, the intensity of the approval was quite different on the different sides. Or there's a tremendous amount of money that's being put into it in opposition that you don't see. I mean, there's so many things more than just this one study. So you can't take just this one study means I'm right.
Yes, right. The study tells you, absent everything else, like having to cast a ballot, I will say I like this thing.
Right. Again, what you
In a
should do is try to come to the conclusion that makes sense based on your own experience and talking with people.
Right.
And then if you see a study that supports it, you go, well, okay, I'm not crazy. At least this study supports it, but it doesn't prove it. There may be 5 other studies that say the opposite that you just haven't seen, which is one of the reasons why I spend a lot of time reading conservative media, because I don't want to miss those things. If it turns out the only study that showed what I think is true is supported by the study, and there's 9 others that say otherwise, well, you don't want to do that. We know that with elections. This election says that McAuliffe's up by 9. Yeah, well, all these other ones say it's a 3-point race. Well, I'm going to glom on the 9. Well, maybe you shouldn't.
Yes, although I don't know anybody that does that. They say, it's 3 or negative. We're losing by 3. Okay, all right. Wait a second.
Especially if you're a fundraiser. It's a disaster.
Right. Yeah. We
need
dying
money.
here.
Send us money.
Right. Send money to the disaster people.
Right.
All right.
Because leaders refuse to accept where voters report they're at a given moment necessarily dictates where they're capable of going. And that's why I don't pay too much attention to these stories about Biden and malaise because, focus groups say he's not focused enough on the pandemic. Well, things can change as soon as this week. If it turns out that everybody gets boosters who wants them, and we have enough, and those numbers on the pandemic keep continuing to drop, there's a lot of time between now and 2022. So the election isn't today. What's happening with the pandemic is going to affect the economy. What's happening with the economy is going to affect the election. And so a lot of this stuff still has to play out. At the same time, again, Democrats can't be caught in the situation of, well, we're still working on it. That's a disaster. You have to be laser focused on a few different things at the same time and say so. We're laser focused on the pandemic. Well, what about this economy and getting this, voting rights thing done? We're laser focused on that too. What about, getting this reconciliation stuff, which includes a lot of climate change stuff, which people really care about, the ones who voted for you? Well, we're laser focused on that too. Well, how can you be laser focused on all of those things at the same time? We are.
That's
and just leave it at that.
$3.4 trillion of
don't give me how
trillion
complicated it is. Don't tell me it's going to come later. Don't tell me about how difficult it is to work with your fellow. Just tell me your lawyers are focused on it's all, and otherwise shut up.
Oh, all right.
And then get it done.
Well, that part.
The get it done part.
Yes. Well, we reserved the last $0.1 trillion for that. $3.4 trillion of the 3.5 is on lasers. So we have plenty of them, and all of them are focused in all of those things. It's the getting done part. Well, that's what the last, $100 billion is for.
Yeah, something like that. Anyway, that's my rant for today.
Okay. We'll accept that as...
Hey, here's some good news.
Yes?
The stain for Iowa's first in the nation presidential caucus has been rising for years. Democrats may have enough reasons now to ditch them.
Yeah. I did see that.
That was fun. Weekend. I like that.
I saw Armando being happy about that one.
Amazing.
Pushing for that one.
I thought Armando loved the Iowa caucus.
Oh yeah.
That's a different Armando.
Yeah. Well, that would be a pretty amazing thing. That would be a huge...
That was Armando
change.
Jones from Iowa.
Oh.
Not our Armando.
Yeah, he liked it a lot because there was hot chocolate. And the voting, who cares? It was just a way to get inside. All right. Well, that would be a pretty big win to change that. I don't know if it gets us out from underneath the doom and gloom that the predictors gave us over the weekend, but it would be a nice change. And maybe it changes the messaging to the extent that matters. All right. By the way, any idea how much a laser costs?
They're pretty cheap.
Yeah. Okay. So it's really
everybody's shooting them at airplanes,
Yeah. Right. And they're on the guns. People are pointing at things with them all over the place. So It's not that hard to be laser focused.
Of course, I'm laser focused. Everybody's laser focused.
Yeah. Right. You can even they have little ones that.
Didn't you ever play laser tag? Come on.
Right. And that would
There's
show
like
you.
There's 8 people on my team. They're all focusing.
Right. You have to, or else you get no points. So.
Yeah, exactly right.
All right. Well,
you have to be laser focused or you get no points. That's exactly the point I'm trying to make here. Thank you so much for summing it up. This is Greg Gorkin speaking with my good friend David Waldman, who sometimes befuddled about what the heck I'm talking about. But, we've been doing this for so long. He gives me enough airspace to try to straighten it out by the time I get off. And if I haven't, then I'll be back on Wednesday. And maybe we can tie him some loose ends there.
We turn the airspace into rope and give you enough either way.
Okay. Take care.
Very good. Thank you. Wednesday. All right, Greg. We'll do that. And
today was a holiday. Are we having a show today? I forgot to ask you.
Oh, shoot. No.
No. Oh, okay.
This whole thing has been for nothing.
This whole thing has been like nobody's going to hear it.
I can't believe it. Well, that could still be the case. But maybe they're having their morning coffee and having.
Yeah, well, just David and I discussing things over breakfast as we are wont to do.
Right. Yes, we're here for the holiday. There's a Canadian one and an American one. Presumably something somewhere else as well. Someone can look it up. Things are changing. The name of the holiday is changing. It's a very exciting time.
Now, who's directing that?
Directing what?
The change of the holiday.
Steven Spielberg is directing. I don't know.
Is it local? Is it like?
Well, there was a White House proclamation this time. There was the first one.
Yeah, but does that make it official across the country, or it just said the White House says that I'm calling this day, and in Diners all over Ohio, they're saying. I don't know what he's talking about.
That could be. I mean, they are, because I'm sure that their favorite local radio host told them what an outrage it was, because we all know that waspy American white supremacists are very excited about the Italian guy sailing for Spain and landing in Latin America. So I know it was huge for them. I did see somebody point out that you'd think that the white supremacists would be pushing to make this like Leif Erikson Day, as opposed to, sticking with or changing in any direction from Columbus. But they're clinging to whatever they can. I don't know what makes it official. I don't know if there was ever anything official for Columbus, for that matter. But White House proclamation around here, in the Washington D.C. area, I guess it carries some influence, and I imagine the banks are happy to be giving their people the day off, no matter what they're calling it. And it's been a popular movement in progressive circles for a long time. I don't know what makes it official. What makes, like I asked in the beginning of the show, what makes National Oat Checks Day that? I don't know. Maybe like a star registry, when you can name a star. If someone $35, therefore it's official. I don't know. Good question. Don't know that I'd spend any time on it from here on in, but now I feel like I might.
Well, it took you to the end of the hour, so at least it did that. Take care, and I'll talk to you on Wednesday.
Okay. National Something Else Day. All right. See you then. Well, we are in a bit of chaos about that, and it'd be interesting to try and, I wonder if I can sort that out over I only have the 1 minute break coming up, so it'll be a little short. But speaking of chaos, I do have an article here that speaks to that, and maybe we'll save it for the other side so we can read it all at once. Democrats set up chaotic end-of-year stretch. We all like chaos, and we obviously we're being told by the Washington Press Corps, or we keep thinking about the Washington Press Corps, that they missed the chaos of the Trump administration. So here comes some chaos. Democrats, this is in the Hill. Jordan Carney, the writer of this one, and I guess... I don't know whether he was really on any kind of messaging mission to lay chaos at the feet of the Democrats, so much as recognizing the fact that there's an awful lot that needs to be accomplished between now and the end of the year. That's usually the case anyway, and usually the case heading into an election year, because everyone's afraid that nothing will get done in an election year. But here we've left ourselves a lot of work. We've been talking about it for a long time. As we debated whether or not we should say we're kicking the can down the road with certain things, but the debt ceiling moves only as late as December, January. The government funding only lasts into December as well. So we're going to be back on all these big problems. Plus, of course, we'll still be Infrastructure Week for the rest of the year. Welcome back now to the Kagro in the Morning Show here on Netroots Radio. I did type into Google while we were away, what makes an official holiday? I don't think that's that's not the way to phrase the search, but I was running out of time. And there are some answers. Do you want to know what they are? There's a 2014, and it mentions Columbus Day. Beep. Right, okay, we're getting rid of Columbus. What does it take to create a holiday? This is an October 12th, 2014 article in the Washington Post, and we are in the Washington area, so, that officially counts for us. The Washington Post reported it. But the Google results on that, by the way, come back with make up your own holiday day, a fun holiday time. So I guess somebody thought that was funny, and they made a national make up your own holiday. So very meta. There's a list of federal holidays in the United States, according to Wikipedia. I wonder, Wikipedia is pretty quick to get updated. What do they say today is on this list of federal holidays? They still list it as Columbus Day here. And the description says, as you might expect, Columbus Day honors Christopher Columbus, whose exploration of the Americas in the years 1492 to 1504. They don't often put the end date on that, so that's instructive. Marked the beginning of the European exploration and colonization of the Americas. The holiday is observed on the second Monday in October. That gives me my answer as to why it lands where it does. And is one of two federal holidays where stock market trading is permitted. How about that? So they don't care. So the wisest, most brilliant people in America apparently don't care one way or the other about Columbus, so you don't have to either. In some areas, it is instead a celebration of indigenous peoples or Italian culture and heritage, traditionally October 12th. Okay. I don't know which that applies to, the Italian culture thing or the indigenous peoples thing, but at any rate, we're seeing that change, and I'm happy that it has. Let's see. There's some mention of the Juneteenth thing and how they're getting there. And, I mean, how did we get that one? The Juneteenth thing was that also presidential proclamation? Let's see. I mean, that's my recollection, right? What does the Juneteenth Wikipedia entry say? Federal holiday in the United States commemorate. Well, we know what it commemorates. What about, like, the history part? Is there becoming a federal holiday? There we go. In 1996, the first federal legislation, to recognize the Juneteenth Independence Day was introduced in the House of Representatives. Interested in knowing who it was? Barbara Rose Collins of Michigan. And let's see, here we are. When it was officially made a federal holiday on June 17th, 2021, it became one of the 5 date-specific federal holidays. Did it do so through legislation or proclamation? It still doesn't say. Let's see. I don't know. That's a good question. That didn't settle it. It just says when it became a federal holiday. Some fun stuff happened. It was on June 17th. My recollection is that there was legislation, right, and they rushed it to President Biden's desk to sign it, and it was all very exciting because he signed it in just in advance of the date and signed it so that it would happen. Yeah, let's see. Here we are. President Joe Biden signed the bill, now known as Public Law 117-17. By the way, in case you're interested in the taxonomy, Public Law 117 because we're in the 117th Congress. If you ever run into that public law. Anyway, legislation. So, I don't know. Does that mean that we're not official yet for Indigenous Peoples Day? It's still the first one for which there's been a presidential proclamation, but I guess we need to have legislation in order to do it. There we are. That's the answer. I wonder what that's probably what the Post was going to tell us. Let's take a look. Sarah Kaplan wrote this back in 2014. What does it take to create a holiday? It's all politics. Parentheses, but Stevie Wonder can help. End parens. That's an intriguing headline meant to draw us in. Will it work? Yes, it will. Who knew that a paid day off from work could be so divisive? Oh, we knew. The Seattle City Council's unanimous vote last week to rename Columbus Day Indigenous Peoples Day. Is this where it started? Was that the first proclamation of some kind? Interesting. Maybe just the first one we noticed. Well, its unanimous vote to do so back in 2014 had Native American activists cheering and Italian heritage groups up in arms. Depending on whom you asked, the name change was either a long overdue recognition that a genocidal, directionally challenged sailor doesn't really warrant a postal holiday, or an affront to Italian Americans and the American tradition of discovery. We say today, basta. We say enough. We say no more discrimination. Not now and not here. Seattle activist Ralph Fascitelli, who is coordinating... Fascitelli, really. Fasci. Who is coordinating an effort to reverse the name change, said at a news conference on Thursday. I think he's lost that battle. But Seattle isn't the first jurisdiction to dismiss a federal holiday. You crazy nuts who think it was. South Dakota has been calling it Native American Day since 1990. How do you like that? While in Alaska and Oregon, the second Monday in October is recognized as the second Monday in October. I don't know. Is that a joke or what? But that's what it says. South Dakota, first out of the box. Interesting. I mean, fairly significant native population, but they're fairly happy to ignore what they want, and for the most part. But I guess now they've swung Kristi Noem's way since then. Anyway, in fact, opposition to Columbus Day goes back to its inception. It was first given national prominence by way of an 1892 declaration, a declaration, not legislation, from President Benjamin Harrison in the wake of the high-profile lynching of 11 Sicilian immigrants in New Orleans. And it was named a federal holiday by FDR in 1934 as a way of countering widespread anti-Italian immigrant sentiment. Interesting. Isn't it, though? It really is. So they do it because, well, gosh, we've been so anti-Italian around here. We really should give them a break and name this holiday for them, and then they'll feel better about having been lynched or being the victims of widespread anti-Italian immigrant sentiment. Interestingly, I don't feel like we would have the same thing happen now. Like, where is there anti-immigrant sentiment, and against whom, and who's being lynched these days? Well, you may have missed the news because I didn't announce it, but you probably picked it up elsewhere because you're well-read and see things beyond what I show you. It's no Fox News here. But there was just recently a report that they found the remains of what they believe to have been a lynched Central American migrant in the desert border region somewhere, and indeterminate origin on this person, I guess. But so it is very fresh in mind. But do you think that the same people who are digging in their heels and saying, well, it has to be Columbus Day, even though many of them are not Italian, they just consider themselves, I don't know, whether white supremacist or traditionalist or both, but yet the sentiment that created it, well, that sentiment can't be extended to people of Central American, Hispanic, or Latine origin because yuck, I guess, is their reasoning. Even though the same people would have been in the 1890s or 1930s, Italians, yuck. But now they're like, oh, well, I guess they have to cling to anybody who's even remotely white if they can. And I imagine, well, Italians are happy to have themselves included in that number for the most part. I guess originally they were just because maybe they'll stop excluding us from jobs or beating us up. But yeah. Can't blame them for being excited about being admitted to the circle at that point. What they do with it once they're admitted 70 years later, that's something different. Anyway, it also notes here, controversially, one of Roosevelt's predecessors, Calvin Coolidge, had declared that he believed Norse explorer Leif Erikson, which I guess is Leif Erikson, should I work on the pronunciation there, was the first European to discover America. Erikson also has a day devoted to him, so there's that. It's October 9th, for whatever reason, so that would have been, is that Saturday, October 9th? Last Saturday. But government employees are required to show up for work that day, except that it's Saturday, so, all right. The Columbus Day holiday was formally legalized by Congress. There was something. In 1968, really. So it took a long time to get around to doing the legislation for it. And people clearly thought we had a Columbus Day at least since the 1930s, if not the 1890s. But it wasn't until 1968 that Congress did anything about it. But even then, states and private businesses weren't required to recognize it, and many didn't. As of this year, only 23 states and the district grant their employees the day off. So that's less than half. Though it's probably more than half of the population. And we'll get into an electoral college decision, gerrymandering discussion later. Considering how difficult it is to create a federal holiday, just 4 have been added to the calendar in the past 100 years. How do you like that? Perhaps it's not surprising that Italian Americans are so reluctant to see theirs changed, but the challenge of getting the government to declare a day off without the benefit of a couple of inches of snow, at any rate, hasn't dissuaded people from trying. Thousands of people signed petitions on the White House's We the People site each year asking for new celebrations to be added to the federal calendar. They run the gamut from totally serious, a concerted effort to have federal election days declared mandatory holidays, to almost as serious but significantly less likely, such as this spring's, this is 2014, Budweiser endorsed petition to create a national day off for Major League Baseball's opening day. Oh yeah, I remember that. Just like Columbus Day, these holiday proposals revolve as much around politics as anything else. The politics of identity, the politics of voting, the politics of sports affiliation. They're about recognition. They're about honor. A petition to establish the Lunar New Year as a federal holiday stated that the designation would lend the holiday the same importance and weight as other cultural days, and the most recent incarnation of the ongoing petition to put an end to Columbus Day argues that doing so would acknowledge the United States' colonial past. Football fans want in on the commemorative action too. A We the People petition from January 2013 called on the president to close offices and schools on the Monday after the Super Bowl, thus honoring, quote, the most popular event in modern American culture. Possibly true, but it just throws the doors open for taking the day off after WrestleMania. We don't need that. I make jokes about, another mattress sale. It must be President's Day. But in fact, these holidays do generate stories and get some people thinking about presidents or Columbus or whatever the case may be, said Brian Balgo, I'm guessing at that pronunciation, who teaches 20th century political history at the University of Virginia. Maybe still does, for all I know. I understand why people fight hard to have certain days remembered. Still, it's unlikely that we'll be skipping work on Super Bowl Monday anytime soon. Officially, anyway. You drunkards may do it already. A Congressional Research Service report found that federal holidays cost taxpayers about $200 million per day, and that was back in 1999. This was part of the argument against the establishment of a Martin Luther King Jr. holiday, which came into effect in 1983, only after Representative John Conyers Jr., of Michigan also, introduced it during every session of Congress for the better part of 15 years. What holidays do or don't get honored with bank closures and public school vacations often has more to do with politics and PR campaigns than philosophy. This is kind of interesting. Gives us I don't know. I'm going to continue with this. Labor Day was the product of an election year compromise intended to appease angry unions in the wake of President Grover Cleveland's deployment of troops during the violent suppression of the Pullman rail workers' strike of 1894. A lot of these things are make goods for massacres and violence. Wow. And the thing that finally put Martin Luther King Jr.'s birthday on the calendar, Stevie Wonder's 1981 single, Happy Birthday, which was released 2 years before the holiday was signed into law. All right, now I get the reference. Convenience is a factor as well. In the same act that formalized Columbus Day as a federal holiday, Congress moved 3 others, Washington's birthday, Memorial Day, and Veterans Day, to Mondays rather than their particular anniversaries. Apparently, this was more cost-effective than granting a day off in the middle of the week, moving the official Washington's birthday celebration to the 3rd Monday of February as part of the Uniform Monday Holiday Act. Also allowed about a dozen states to dub the occasion President's Day and combine it with Abraham Lincoln's birthday, which falls in the same month. That was a nice idea. While it was observed in many states, Lincoln's birthday was never a federal holiday. Interesting, too. Besides, all those petitioners for Lunar New Year and Opening Day are wasting their ink, even if it's virtual, lobbying the White House. Only Congress has the power to declare a federal holiday. That's the answer. Instead, Ballo says, that's the professor, the best way to guarantee a nationwide day off for something is to make it popular at the state level first. Both Columbus Day and King's birthday were celebrated in more than 20 states before Congress decided to make it official. And if all else fails, get Stevie Wonder to write a song about it. Hey, it's worked once before. Yeah, well, that's a sort of a dismissive ending for the battle to get Martin Luther King Day recognized. But all right, we're trying to keep it lighthearted here. We won't have to get into that. Sarah might revise that had she had the chance, but it's committed to ink since October 12th, 2014. All right. Well, let's go back to the well to round up on the rest of the things. We wanted to talk about the chaotic end of the year. Wanted to also share with you all on air the note from Brian Monroe, who says, Happy Canadian Thanksgiving from sunny Mexico. He's celebrating his Thanksgiving Ted Cruz style, I guess, in Mexico. How do you like that? We are here, he says, for the entire month of October. Why? How could that possibly be the case? Remember, be jealous, everybody. He's Canadian. He's probably got that time coming to him. And you don't, because of choices we've made as a political entity. All right, anyway. He's there lucky enough for the entire month of October and having an amazing time. Mexicans, he says, sure know how to comply with COVID regulations. That was my observation of the Costa Ricans as well. They really were taking things seriously. Big cultural difference there, which, may or may not be a good thing, all told. I mean, it's great in this particular context, I guess, and they've been doing a pretty good job containing the virus vis-a-vis us here in the United States. But I wonder how much of their compliance is due to an innate and well-grounded fear of what it means to defy the government on things like this in certain Latin American countries. Could be the case, though I don't think that's been the history of Costa Rica, so maybe not. Anyway, just thought that was of some interest. Oh, and that reminded me of something else that happened over the weekend. We'll see if I can get around to reminding you all what the rest of it was. But okay, I'll make a note to myself. Jump back to the last thing I promised you. Democrats set up chaotic end-of-year stretch. Remember? Sorry, Jordan, we made you wait on this one. Oh, look, there's Ryan Grimm on my screen as the video rolls here. I don't know if this has anything to do with this article or not. You know how the way, maybe you don't. If you don't, you're lucky. You don't see enough articles from the Hill to know that they're playing video of something all the time, no matter what. And even if you scroll away from it, it just shoots it down your screen until later. All right. The chaos stuff. Democrats are facing a daunting stretch as the party struggles to get beyond internal battles to win approval of President Biden's agenda and deal with other crises that have effectively been punted to the Christmas season. Democrats are entering the home stretch of the year with 4 big priorities. I emphasized that badly, but they're home stretch of the year with also 4 big priorities. It's not like the year with 4 big priorities or anything, like the year without a Santa Claus. Funding the government, 1, raising the debt ceiling, 2, passing both the bipartisan infrastructure bill, 3, and a sweeping social spending measure, reconciliation, 4. It's a stretch that could make or break Biden's agenda and will surely set up battles for next year's midterm elections. A lot of people would say, hey, there should be the voting rights thing in there, and I'm getting the feeling that they're letting that fall by the wayside. Maybe they think that's something that they can accomplish next year. But history says, the historical pattern has been, nope, nothing gets accomplished in the next year. There's a lot of stress being felt, or a lot of things at stake in terms of causes that many of us fought for a lifetime, said Senator Dick Durbin, the number 2 Senate Democrat. You all know he's from Illinois by now, I think. Tensions between Democrats, including moderates, maybe sort of, kind of, versus progressives, and maybe it's sort of kind of versus, but really not. I mean, the 2 people that stand out when you talk about stuff like this, Manchin, Sinema, not particularly moderate, and also not really, the tension between Democrats is between these 2 and everybody else. The everybody else contains and includes everyone from progressives to moderates. So this is really a fringe thing among the Democratic caucus. But at any rate, the tensions between Democrats, the Senate versus the House, that's another tension that happens here, and moderates versus leadership, which is, I guess, the way they're trying to describe things in the House, are increasingly boiling over. That includes a days-long shadow boxing match between Senate Budget Committee Chairman Bernie Sanders and centrist Joe Manchin over Biden's social spending measure. Manchin and Sanders have spent days trading criticisms through the press, but Sanders brushed off a question about if they or Senator Kyrsten Sinema, another so-called moderate Sanders has urged to be more specific, should get in the room together to hash things out. This is not a movie, or as how we say, this is not a movie. I got to do my Sanders voice. I got to start with the word disaster. This is a disaster. Now I can get into that. Anyway, he says this is not a movie when you've got 48 people on one side, there we are, it's simply not fair, not right that one or two people say my way or the highway. Well, that's true. And he's got that one correct, even if I can't bring his voice to mind right now. Sanders and progressives disagree with Manchin, Sinema, and House centrists over the measure's policy details and size. Well, we think we disagree over the details, but Sinema won't tell us. Sanders is refusing to acknowledge a price tag below $3.5 trillion, while Congressional Progressive Caucus Chairwoman Pramila Jayapal of Washington is pushing for a bill around $3 trillion. That's significantly higher than Manchin's top line of $1.5 trillion, or sometimes $2, or the roughly $2 trillion range floated by the White House. The bipartisan infrastructure bill already passed by the Senate, progressives say won't move through the House without passage of the larger spending bill, but that's left moderates fuming. Fume. Here comes one. Moderate Representative Jared Golden of Maine said some of his constituents are, quote, sick of the bickering. Yeah, sick of the bickering, yeah. And they can't get there from here, so whatever. And want Congress to stop fighting and sort it out. You guys, stop fighting. I strongly support the bipartisan infrastructure bill and think the House should pass and send it to the president immediately. As for the separate $3.5 trillion draft reconciliation proposal in the House, I cannot support it in its current form, nor you could try. Nor does it currently have the votes to pass in Congress. Golden wrote in a Portland Press Herald op-ed. Well, he's wrong. Anyway, Democrats face tough choices if they have to lower the size of the bill, as is likely. Durbin, acknowledging that reality, urged Democrats to settle on a number, adding that the sooner we get this done, the better. Everyone's not going to win at the end of the day. Much of the weekend bickering was over whether or not it really was a good idea to focus on the numbers so much, right? I think the prominent theme of the late weekend was over polling, which I think I saw the CBS folks circulating, that some overwhelming percentage of people say to pollsters that they support the reconciliation bill, but very few people can actually say what's in it, which sounds embarrassing, but it's actually not all that embarrassing. And that's kind of the way we've conducted politics forever around here, so I'm not particularly worried about it, but it generates controversial headlines. Durbin, acknowledging the reality, urged Democrats to settle on a number. They had hoped to fund everything from combating climate change, now we know what's in it, to immigration reform, as well as housing, childcare, education assistance, and a healthcare expansion. Maybe the reason, by the way, that people don't know what's in it is it's in flux and they keep changing the number. And if you change the number, you're going to change what gets done in it too. That's how you would change the number, cutting things out. But okay. So maybe it really wasn't worth learning what was in it, given that it isn't coming to the floor anytime soon. But as the top line slips, they'll need to think about investing heavily in a smaller number of programs or keeping their expansive wish list, but taking more incremental approaches across the board. While Democratic leadership is aiming to have the bill to Biden by the end of October, senators acknowledge that they aren't married to a timeline. Some of them aren't even married at all. Obviously, we want to get it done as quickly as possible, but obviously this is an enormously complicated and consequential bill. This is not a baseball game. That's true. Sanders said, asked if the deal to put the debt ceiling, that's what it says. The deal to put the debt ceiling put pressure on Democrats to get the social spending bill done quickly. But they also can't risk it dragging too far into the fall. If they can't pass the bipartisan infrastructure bill by the end of October, they'll need to pass another short-term highways extension, and the scheduling of other must-pass bills, including the annual defense policy bill, have also been in limbo as Democrats try to figure out when they'll bring their two-part spending package to the floor. They also risk running directly into round 2 of their fight over the debt ceiling and funding the government. Government funding is set to run out on December 3rd, setting a hard deadline for lawmakers to prevent a shutdown heading into the holidays, and the Treasury estimates that the $480 billion debt hike, which is expected to pass on Tuesday in the House, will extend the nation's borrowing limit to roughly the same time. I probably should have saved this whole thing for tomorrow when Joan was here. But now we can spend our time on other things, and she'll have this as background anyway. When exactly the debt ceiling will hit is unclear. It always is. The Bipartisan Policy Center's Shai Akabas noticed that analysts are trying to estimate how much money is going into and out of the government, and that the uncertainty comes on the back end of the December 3rd timeline. Both sides are already digging in. Let's read this through to the break. Senate Majority Leader Chuck Schumer is doubling down on his pledge that Democrats won't use reconciliation, for reasons we've discussed before. You know what it is, of course, to pass a long-term debt hike later this year. The votes are tough politically for Democrats because they have to raise the debt ceiling to a number instead of suspending it to a date. I don't know if that formula changes now that they have just done exactly that, and nobody died. Anyway, the solution is for Republicans to either join us in raising the debt limit or stay out of the way and let Democrats address the debt limit ourselves, Schumer said. Senate Democrats want a long-term solution. I hope my Republican colleagues relent from trying to make it one when we revisit this issue soon, and we will. And speaking of soon, we'll be back in 2 minutes. Hi, it's me, David Waldman, the same guy who was just talking to you a second ago. Our Patreon subscription drive is still going strong, with over 175 monthly donors who help keep us on the air. If we've helped keep you going during the pandemic, why not return the favor and help us keep going so we can all be together for the next disaster? Patreon.com, Patreon.com, makes it easy to make secure, recurring monthly contributions to support our show. Patreon.com/KagroX gets you straight to our donation page. Maybe you'd like to thank us for keeping you sane during the Trump era. Maybe you're looking forward to in-depth explanations of what's going on in the Biden administration. Whatever it is that keeps you listening, we need your help to keep bringing it to you. And hey, if you happen to prefer using PayPal or even the Square Cash app, we're up and running with those options too. Thanks again, everyone, for all your support. We literally could not do this without you. Welcome back now to the Kagro in the Morning Show here on Netroots Radio. We're into our last segment. I'm going to call it done on the Hill article here. The rest of it is sort of discussion of background information that we have talked about for a long time here. But anyway, that sets up the confusing and cluttered schedule between now and the end of the year, if they even get to all of these things, and the various deadlines. And now we know that December 3rd is the date to watch on things. And, well, at least that's when the government funding runs out. And then soon thereafter, the debt ceiling comes up again. But, okay, I think that kind of catches us up. Now, there's a couple other things that need discussion. But before I get to them, I want to bring this one to your attention. I just found in my email from listener Dave R. We'll just go with Dave R. because that's all it says in his email. If you look, you can see the rest of his last name. But I don't know if he wants me to tell all of you that he's got a last name, even though you probably imagined it was true. Dave R. sends me this interesting tidbit for inclusion in, I don't know what, we'll say rounding out our coronavirus pandemic picture. I think if you had, I don't know, if you just threw the door open and said, hey, let's discuss where the breakthrough infections are happening, I probably wouldn't have landed on this, but now that I have it explained to me, that makes some sense. I'm curious how they land on this. But he sends me from MedPage Today, like medical, medicine, page, whatever, I don't know. Today, that means today, comes this story, the upshot of which is that there's a study that proves this to be the case. Molly Walker has written this up for MedPage Today. Study says drug use is a factor in COVID breakthrough infections, like drug use, like, illicit drug use. It says in the subheader here, cocaine and cannabis users are at the highest risk. And again, I don't know whether that has anything to do with the drugs themselves or the way they're used or, pharmacologically, whether they do anything, or whether it may also just be, well, look, everybody's using cocaine and cannabis. We don't know how it's affecting users of, mushrooms, psilocybin, but that's because there are so few of them out there. I don't know whether it has anything to do with the pharmacology of it all. Although the article is illustrated with a picture of someone like old school cocaining it up here. But like in terms of it actually being powder cocaine on a mirror and snorting it through a dollar bill, but it's a $1 bill, which I don't know. I mean, I guess that was the most readily available, but they're probably the dirtiest bills too. Which brings us to the next question of whether or not it is, if you're sharing your cocaine or cannabis old school, then there's probably a lot more breakthrough infections going on because you're like sharing stuff that has been either up your nose or in your mouth. And it may be the case, for instance, that while heroin users are sharing needles, there's no, COVID aerosols on the needles. They're sharing it and giving each other infections of other sorts. But yeah, I wonder if that has anything to do with it. Here, I just used this thing stuck up my nose. Why don't you stick it up your nose in the middle of a friggin' COVID pandemic? I don't know that it's cocaine that's doing it. It's the straw. Similarly, I guess if you're passing around joints and bongs and whatnot. But if it's breakthrough infections in the consumers of edible gummy bears, then we have something else going on here. Unless there's birds that are sharing pre-chewed gummy bears with one another and putting in their whatever. Anyway, fully vaccinated individuals with substance use disorders were more likely to have breakthrough COVID-19 infections than those without such disorders. Researchers found already were offending the cannabis people by calling it a disorder. But that too, I mean, if you really genuinely have a drug problem, then, I mean, that may also be an issue too. And it's not, well, it's the particular drug that's making me susceptible to it, or drug use in general, so much as it is, I'm high and I forgot to put a mask on, or I'm just not thinking about things. I'm just typically not a very careful person because either the drugs are doing it to me or it's a part of, part and parcel of the drug addiction is making me less able to care for myself. Anyway, adjusted analyses, and that's supposed to, I guess, correct for that stuff, found that breakthrough infections were higher in patients with all types of substance use disorder except tobacco, which I don't know what that's supposed to mean, and were the highest among cocaine users and cannabis users, reported Lindsay Wang, PhD of Case Western Reserve University in Cleveland, and colleagues. So there you go. I don't think that means you're supposed to start smoking tobacco. It may mean that so many fewer people are smoking tobacco and they tend to isolate themselves by having to go out to the smoking areas. They're 6 foot distancing with everybody else. However, and they're, by the way, in exhaling their smoke, showing everybody where are their aerosols going, and you can walk around their clouds. I don't know. I'm making it up as I go along here, but when matching patients with and without substance use disorders for lifetime comorbidities and social determinants of health, only increased risk for breakthrough infections among cannabis users remains significant. The authors wrote in World Psychiatry. So I guess cannabis users have the most significant problem with it. And we don't know why. This may indicate that additional variables, such as behavioral factors or adverse effects of cannabis on pulmonary and immune function, that could be, I suppose, could contribute to the higher risk for breakthrough infection in this group. Although you'd think that, I mean, is there no pulmonary effects to snorting cocaine? You would think. I don't know. Anyway, Wang's group added that drugs and alcohol compromise immune function, which could put a person at higher risk of infection. That's also probably true. The authors also noted that the clinical trials for the COVID-19 vaccines did not explicitly include patients with substance use disorders. They examined electronic health records for 579,372 individuals. How do you like that? Across 63 U.S. healthcare organizations who were fully vaccinated from December 2020 to August of 2021, of which 30,183 had a diagnosis of substance use disorder. Patients with substance use disorders were older than those without it, mean age of 59 versus 55, respectively, and there were more men, and a higher proportion of African Americans as well. All right, well, it's all very interesting. I don't know if I'm going to draw any conclusions here, except that I can cast aspersions about the conclusions. But generally speaking, well, it's of some interest, and I don't know if it's going to change your behavior or not. But I can think of a lot of things that might contribute to the increased risk, and not just necessarily the drugs, but I doubt very much that it's helping you. But weirder things have happened. People believe that eating horse paste will help you. So, I can imagine people convincing themselves that the drugs are good for them at this stage. All right. Anyway, very interesting. Thanks for bringing that up. Something to think about. Another crazy thing over the weekend that came to light. I believe The Intercept reporting this one, although I saw a couple of other people picking up on their report. Just want to put this on the record. I don't know how much of this I really got to read, but, it's The Intercept. Ryan Grimm and Max Ufberg. Is that how he pronounces it? Ufberg. Well, sorry, Max, if we got it wrong. Here's the headline for you. Steve Mnuchin stepped in to prevent Ivanka Trump World Bank appointment. Oh, boy. President Donald Trump very much wanted Ivanka at the helm, and it was the Treasury Secretary who blocked her assent. That is some scary stuff. The article is what it is. Just as the headline said, Donald Trump decided that he wanted to put Ivanka in as president of the World Bank. And Steve Mnuchin somehow managed to step in and say, you really can't do that. And I would like to know more about the mechanism by which he was able to do that and what, if anything, he said to Trump. But I don't think that actually appears in the article itself. I just wanted to make you aware of the fact that this crazy, stupid thing actually entered Donald Trump's head. It didn't appear to enter Ivanka's head, or she has better PR people, and was able to get into the story, at the very least, was able to get into the story that, no, she didn't really seriously consider it, and she was very happy to step up and show her dad, no, this other person that serious people want to put in there at the World Bank, even if he sucks, for that matter, is very good, and they'll be great, and Ivanka's choice is this other person, Dad, so you should sign on to it. And I guess ultimately he did. So there you go. I just find that pretty amazing. Let's see. There's a mention of Mick Mulvaney in here. I wanted to take a look at this. Ivanka did, however, aid Treasury Secretary Mnuchin and White House Chief of Staff Mick Mulvaney in the selection process, which is bad enough. But yeah, maybe that was the only way that Donald Trump would accept their recommendation. I want to put Ivanka in there. But Ivanka says she wants to put someone else in there. And it might not necessarily have been, I belong in this decision process. I mean, it could be. She's pretty egotistical too. But it also could have been justified by saying, well, if I help out, then you can say, well, Ivanka actually made this decision. And then you might be able to count on Donald Trump, actually allowing it to go through. So that's scary and dismaying. That was almost actually our government, and the World Bank for that matter. Let's see. I wanted to read this piece for you as well from the Huffington, or not the Huffington, the HuffPost. SV Date reminded me of the SR Haddon inflection from Contact, but everything reminds me of Contact. This is an interesting piece. I saw him tweeting about it over the weekend. People enjoyed it. Looked like a good one. Touches on things we've discussed and helps put a finer point on some of it. Trump forcing courts to decide if executive privilege has a coup plotting exception. This would sort of be like the crime fraud exception to his claim of executive privilege. And apparently he has given that instruction to the many people subpoenaed by the January 6th investigative select committee. And it's not clear who is actually listening to him on this versus who's not, but it sounds like Steve Bannon is taking his instruction and refusing to comply, and others are in negotiations about what they'll discuss, which they shouldn't really even be negotiating, but that's where we are. The Biden White House offers a rationale that says attempts to subvert the Constitution, and SV Date puts the subvert in scare quotes, subvert the Constitution shouldn't be protected by a constitutional, quote, executive privilege idea. That he puts in scare quotes as well. Let's read through this. Does a president who tries to overthrow the republic to remain in power get to keep those planning conversations secret for decades to come? Or is there a coup plotting exception to executive privilege? We were wondering this at the end of last week when I didn't use quite the same language. I didn't formalize it and say there's a coup plotting exception. But so much as I said, well, something more akin to a crime fraud exception for most privileges. You know, there are privileges that are legitimate, and there are ways to destroy that privilege if you are using it or attempting to use it to try to cover up the evidence of a crime or a fraud. If the crime is fraud, then the answer is pretty clear. But yeah, you shouldn't be able to use it to shield yourself from the emergence of evidence of your wrongdoing. Nor, as I put it, should you be able to use executive privilege to shield yourself from the emergence of evidence that you weren't working as a legitimate chief executive for some period of time, and you were in fact instead a criminal plotting your crime for activities that would have been well outside your job description as president. You're almost by definition necessarily outside of the job definition when you are looking to subvert the Constitution. There's a whole thing about taking an oath not to do that. That's how you become president in actuality, right? You've been elected. How do we make it official? You swear to uphold the Constitution. And then if you subvert it instead, you must not be doing your job. You're doing something else. And that other thing is not entitled to the deference of executive privilege. Only things that you're doing in furtherance of your execution of your oath could possibly fall under that. Well, anyway, so as he puts it, is there a coup plotting exception to executive privilege? That is the question former President Donald Trump could force federal courts to confront after his successor, Joe Biden, on Friday approved the release of all the documents that the House committee investigating the January 6th assault on the U.S. Capitol had asked for in its initial request. President Biden has determined that an assertion of executive privilege is not in the best interest of the United States and therefore is not justified as to any of the documents, wrote White House counsel Dana Remus in a letter to the National Archives. Just pausing for another comment here. What's happening here? President Biden has determined that this assertion of executive privilege is not in the best interest of the United States. I will say that almost certainly someone in the Office of Legal Counsel, OLC, or elsewhere in the White House counsel's office, or at in DOJ, almost certainly someone argued the opposite and said long-term it really is in the best interest of the United States for presidents to afford one another, even former presidents, afford one another executive privilege on almost anything, just on the outside chance that you will do something that is subject to a differing interpretation later on. But you should be able to, well, here's the real problem. You should be able to call on a president of the opposite party later on to honor executive privilege for you because you have done that courtesy for other former presidents, this time including Republican former President Donald Trump. But, well, I don't know. You don't have to look any further than like last week when it was pretty obvious that Democrats going out of their way in the United States Senate in the past to aid the majority Republicans who have had to face the debt ceiling question before and going out of their way to help raise the debt ceiling or suspend the debt ceiling when necessary in order to keep the government functioning and not to default is not repaid in kind. So don't linger on that. It's really not going to help you. Anyway. The letter goes on. Oh, I was going to say I was going to draw a parallel for you that what's happening here is almost certainly someone is advising him to do otherwise, but he is going in the opposite direction. This is analogous to what's going on with the Senate parliamentarian. And pick your circumstance, but if you're talking about, let's say, including immigration language in a reconciliation bill, almost certainly the parliamentarian recommends against it, and yet the decision actually lies with the presiding officer, if that's Kamala Harris, fine. If it's somebody else, fine. They can say, duly noted. That's not my view of it for whatever reason, and I'm going in the opposite direction. Here, too, probably someone with the kind of authority out there who would otherwise, if the president agreed with them, would memorialize this in an OLC memo. And as we know, that's like ironclad law forever until you don't want it to be anymore. Or DOJ policy or what have you. That could really be nearly codified by the memos that, in this case, the president has read and decided not to go with. It's not overruling the OLC or the DOJ or the parliamentarian in the analogous situation. It's simply ruling contrary to their advice. So, the letter goes on to offer a framework that would, if applied to future document requests, release virtually everything related to January 6th that was generated during the Trump administration. The constitutional protections of executive privilege should not be used to shield from Congress or the public information that reflects a clear and apparent effort to subvert the Constitution itself, Remus wrote. Okay, good for you. In a Friday letter of his own, Trump nevertheless claimed executive privilege over 47 numbered documents in the first batch, as well as anything else the committee might ask for in the future. Anything else, no matter what it is. I hereby make a protective assertion of constitutionally based privilege with respect to all additional records following the first tranche, he wrote, or someone wrote for him. In an accompanying statement, Trump referenced the investigation of the assistance he received from Russia in his 2016 election, both his impeachments, which he called hoaxes, and his often repeated lies about having won the 2020 election. We won 2 elections, did far better in the second than in the first, and now perhaps have to do it a third time. Somehow makes it into his letter about this. Norm Eisen, who served as an ethics lawyer in the Barack Obama White House and more recently worked for the House committee overseeing Trump's first impeachment, said Biden's approach will keep very little about January 6th under wraps. The administration has waived the privilege first as to the testimony, now as to this batch of documents, but both based on reasoning that will sweep broadly, and rightly so, he said. Trump, who tried to overthrow American democracy after losing his re-election bid in November, has been trying to quash both the document requests by the Select Committee as well as subpoenas it has issued to his former aides and allies. Friday saw the first public flashpoint on both efforts as the committee released a statement saying that Mark Meadows, Trump's former chief of staff, and Kash Patel, Trump's hand-picked chief of staff to his acting Secretary of Defense in the final weeks, were, so far, engaging with the Select Committee. The statement said that Trump's one-time chief strategist, Steve Bannon, was not complying with the subpoena demands. It did not mention at all Dan Scavino, Trump's social media advisor, and I guess he was, what did we say, deputy chief of staff there, who reportedly has so far managed to avoid accepting service of the subpoena. I believe that changed over the weekend, by the way. We will enforce subpoenas, said Representative Liz Cheney of Wyoming. You know that. The committee vice chair. And that's what she said on Twitter. Anyway, not that she was the vice chair. That was already true. Committee members, including Chairman Benny Thompson, a Mississippi Democrat, have previously stated that those defying subpoenas will be referred to the Justice Department for criminal charges of obstructing Congress. Okay, that's of some interest. It won't be inherent contempt. That's not necessary at this point. So, they have a compliant DOJ, I think. Merrick Garland is theirs, but we'll see what we can get out of him. Bannon attorney Robert Costello, in a letter to the committee on Thursday, said Bannon would not comply with his subpoena because Trump was asserting executive privilege and had asked Bannon not to comply. Costello said Friday that what happens will depend on the success of Trump's legal challenge. It's a decision made by the court, not by us. Meadows, Patel, and Scavino did not respond to HuffPost queries. The White House had previously stated that though each request for documents would be treated on a case-by-case basis, Biden's view was that January 6th and the weeks leading up to it were an unprecedented attack on American democracy, and that his inclination would be to release Trump's documents related to that to the committee. Friday's letter to the National Archives restated that view. These are unique and extraordinary circumstances, Remus's letter said, an unprecedented effort to obstruct the peaceful transfer of power threatening not only the safety of Congress and others present at the Capitol, but also the principles of democracy enshrined in our history and our Constitution. The documents shed light on events within the White House on or about January 6th and bear on the Select Committee's need to understand the facts underlying the most serious attack on the operations of the federal government since the Civil War. Trump became the first president in 232 years of U.S. elections to refuse to turn over power peacefully to his successor. Yes, and that was an obligation, and we ought to be investigating that. Yeah, something occurred to me along the way here, but at any rate, probably well worth noting that, unprecedented to be sure, and easily, therefore, I think, distinguishable from all other circumstances, and they shouldn't worry too much about the need for, they shouldn't worry too much about a normal occupant of the White House in the future. Normal, if there are any more, just routinely affording Biden the same executive privilege as has always been recognized, but also recognizing the difference between that and what Trump's trying to do. Anyway, he spent weeks attacking the legitimacy of the November 3rd contest he lost, starting his lies in the pre-dawn hours of November 4th that he had really won in a, quote, landslide and that his victory was being, quote, stolen from him. Those falsehoods continued through a long string of failed lawsuits challenging the results in a handful of states. There were 60 losses in failed lawsuits. Anyway, I was going to say, by the way, this was a good opportunity to reiterate my call, which originated here with our production assistant in the background here, my wife's idea, to petition early that there never be a state funeral for Donald Trump. By the way, it also reminded me, actually, would have been an inspirational beginning to the show to remind everybody each day, good morning, it's time for another show, and you are one day closer to Donald Trump's funeral than you were yesterday. Of course, if you want to put a particularly bad spin on it, because we're Democrats, you want to be hand-wringers, you're also a day closer to your own. So it's not, we're just saying across the board, we're all one day closer to everybody's, right? So not wishing any ill on Donald Trump. I do that separately, and I've got that base covered, believe me. But truthfully, something to normalize and to say fairly frequently. I joke about it so that you can normalize it and say it a lot, but I mean, wouldn't it be just the ultimate insult for Trump when he does die to lie and state in the Capitol that he attacked and then, of course, denied attacking? They were hugging and kissing. And he spent the weekend at his rally, claiming that Ashley Babbitt was a martyr and we needed to get to the bottom and there should be justice for Ashley Babbitt, which I think Armando said. Is he calling for her posthumous trial for treason? Justice for Ashley Babbitt? That has to be it, right? Anyway, we'll continue with this and wrap things up for the day. Trump and some of his advisors even discussed using the U.S. military by invoking the Insurrection Act or declaring martial law to retain power despite having lost the election, including by seizing voting machines and ordering revotes in states narrowly won by Biden. But military leaders had earlier made it clear that they would not involve themselves in the political process. So after the Electoral College finally voted on December 14th, making Biden's win official, Trump instead turned to a last-ditch scheme to pressure his own vice president to cancel the ballots of millions of voters in several states Biden had won and declare Trump the winner during the pro forma congressional certification of the election on January 6th. Trump asked his followers to come to Washington that day and then told the tens of thousands who showed up to march on the Capitol to intimidate Mike Pence into doing what Trump wanted. SV Date really going straight to it here. The mob of supporters he incited attempted to do just that by storming the building. They even chanted, "Hang Mike Pence," after Pence refused to comply with Trump's demands. And again, similarly here, I think the case now is that if Pence had felt that the law had in fact permitted him to do the thing he was being asked to do, that he would have done it, just as we find out Raffensperger would have done as well. A police officer, as you know, died after being assaulted during the insurrection. 4 others took their own lives in the days and weeks that followed. One of the rioters was fatally shot as she tried to climb through a broken window into an anteroom containing still evacuating House members, and 3 others in the crowd died during the melee. Though the House impeached Trump for inciting the attack, all but 7 Senate Republicans, led by Kentucky's Mitch McConnell, chose not to convict him, thereby letting Trump continue his political career even as he faces several investigations into his post-election actions, not to mention his pre-election actions, by the way. Those still very much alive. Trump and his allies are now engaged in a campaign to portray the rioter who was shot, Ashley Babbitt, as a martyr, and the hundreds of others who have been arrested as victims of political persecution. Trump continues to suggest he will run for the 2024 GOP nomination for president and is using his Save America Committee's money to continue spreading the falsehoods that culminated in the violence of January 6th. There, that wraps up the article. Brings us up to date. All still very much true. As yet to be determined whether Trump's health allows him to survive and be healthy enough to campaign in 2024. I have my doubts about that. Any number of things can happen between now and then. One of which is for us to hand over the microphone to Justice Putnam for the West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy, which comes up next right here on Netroots Radio. Bet you didn't see us go in that direction. Oh, yes, right. Over the weekend, maybe things were so calm because Netroots Nation was underway. That's another thing that I had forgotten about over the weekend, that we did mention on Friday. Hope you all enjoyed that one. Another one, unfortunately, it had to go virtual thanks to the malfeasance of Donald Trump in ignoring the initial stages of the pandemic. Anyway, what's coming up next? Well, nearly every state is remapping their districts. You know about that after the 2020 census, and that'll impact black and brown communities across the country. What else has he got? A Navy nuclear engineer and his wife were charged with espionage for trying to pass secrets in a peanut butter conspiracy. Yes, I understand they used peanut butter to cover up, cover their tracks. Very interesting.
You have been listening to Kagro in the Morning with David Waldman.
Dog ate the evidence, or could have anyway. What else has he got? The number 2 House Republican Steve Scalise refused to say multiple times whether the 2020 election was stolen or not. And the decline in hydropower in the West has put an extreme strain on power grids during the drought. Tough. Stay tuned.